Where are we going to go here? Well, first of all, thank you, all of you, for being here. We've had an important morning. We've been talking about money laundering. You know, clearly Canadians know that it's just unacceptable that we have criminals that are able to move money in and out of our society, causing challenges like potentially rising real estate prices or issues around criminals being able to even do things as nefarious as being involved in gang activity, or in global terms, there's worries around even terrorist financing. So it's a really important issue that we've been talking about today, money laundering. We've made, in my estimation, some really important progress. We talked, first of all, about people that are moving money through corporations and the need for us to not only to know who owns corporations, but to think about how we can make that transparent. So we had an important discussion about the potential towards making the ownership of corporations transparent. That discussion included, commentary from provinces like Manitoba and Ontario, where they agreed that we should look towards how we make the beneficial ownership potentially transparent. There's more work to be done, but I think that's a really important deliverable from this morning. We talked about as well, and I need to give a really important shout out to Minister Eby and Minister James from British Columbia, who brought about the real importance of thinking about how we prosecute those criminals, those people that are money laundering. We talked about that important issue. From the federal government standpoint, I think many of you will know we put a significant amount of funds into our federal budget in 2019, about $160 million, towards trying to get at our understanding of how money laundering is happening. Today, I'm happy to announce an additional $10 million going to the RCMP so that we can coordinate to get the information and have the systems so that we get that ability to actually prosecute. It's really critically important. Finally, we also made some important progress, I think, on thinking about places where we have gaps in our system. We talked about the real estate sector and how we need to get beneficial ownership in the real estate sector. Again, a place where British Columbia has been in the lead, but we know that we need to have some sort of coordinated approach nationally. It's a provincial jurisdiction, but I think everyone around the table recognizes the challenge. We in the federal government said that we're going to move forward with a working group with the Federation of Law Societies to think about how we can ensure that law societies are part of our effort to make sure that there is not money laundering going on in our country. Ce que je peux dire, c'était une journée importante. Pour nous, la lutte contre le blanchissement d'argent, c'est très important. On a une situation maintenant où il y a une nécessité de considérer comment nous pouvons améliorer notre système pour assurer la confiance dans notre pays au sujet du blanchissement d'argent. Donc, on a eu un accord aujourd'hui avec les provinces et territoires pour améliorer la situation, les efforts spécifiques qui vont donner une meilleure situation dans l'avenir proche. So with that, I'd like to pass it over to my colleague, Minister Carol James, who has importantly been very focused on this issue with her colleagues for a while.
Thank you so much, Minister Morneau, Minister Blair, for coming out, and thank you for the discussion that we've had today. It is no surprise that British Columbians know firsthand the impact of money laundering in our province. It's been an area that obviously as government we have been very focused on and have been moving ahead and taking action on, because money laundering touches every family in British Columbia. Whether we're talking about real estate and the increasing prices and the speculation we've seen in the real estate market, whether we're talking about the challenges of the opioid crisis, money laundering has a personal impact on the people in British Columbia. And so on behalf of myself and Minister Eby, I want to say thank you to the federal government and to our provincial colleagues who came together today to talk about how we can do a better job of sharing data across the country, how we can do a better job of putting together strategies strategies to close loopholes, as we've done here in British Columbia. Certainly, we are a world leader when it comes to beneficial ownership and now requiring a registry for numbered companies so that people can no longer hide behind the corporate veil. They, in fact, will have to disclose who's buying real estate in British Columbia. We're sharing that information with our colleagues across the country in hopes that we will see continued efforts, because as we all know, and I think it's the importance of today, criminals don't know boundaries. They don't know provincial borders. If we close loopholes here, we know that dirty money will be looking for another opportunity. And so I think I can't underestimate the importance of the work that we do with our federal colleagues and with our provincial colleagues in making sure we're closing those loopholes on behalf of not only British Columbians, but in fact, all Canadians. I want to say how much we also appreciate the resources today. I think it would be no surprise that we will continue to push for more. We feel that the critical piece that is here that needs to be addressed is the issue of enforcement. We certainly are doing everything we can to share data, to share the information, but the information is only as good as the people who will move it ahead in criminal investigations and get the prosecutions done. So we've had that conversation that we will continue to push for more resources, but also dedicated resources, because again, we believe it's critical. If the money goes to the RCMP, we want to see it dedicated to the issue of money laundering, white collar crime, making sure that we're addressing those critical issues that we see not only in British Columbia, across the country. So thank you to the ministers for bringing us all together, and thank you for the work that's still to come.
At this stage, we're happy to answer questions, and of course, in English or in French, as you wish.
Please line up at the mic over here, ask your questions, identify yourself. One question, one follow-up.
And who they want to talk to.
Laura Kane, Canadian Press. This question is for the federal ministers. Ontario has asked for David Eby, perhaps you could answer this question too. Ontario wants equal funding to BC to fund a money laundering task force. BC's report found or estimated that BC was actually fourth in the country for money laundering. So are you considering giving the same amount of money to Ontario, or at least equal amounts of money to Ontario as BC?
Well, I think from the federal government standpoint, what we clearly heard today from everybody at the table is that the efforts for us to coordinate our activities are critically important, that we need to be working together. But we also heard and understand that the issue around resources is real. So we've already put resources forward, significant resources, and we already have made commitments towards working together. We are open-minded in terms of thinking about how we take next steps, because we do need to get at the prosecution of the bad guys. I mean, there are people out there who are trying to do things that are driving problems for regular people, whether it's trying to buy a house or be engaged in activities that they're doing in a lawful way. So that is a continuing discussion. It's an important discussion. We identified today, though, some really important steps that we can be taking in collaboration.
So for Ministers Eby or James, I mean, what do you think of Ontario's request? Do you think that BC should still get the bulk of federal funding to fight this issue?
I was really heartened to hear Ontario's request for money to take on money laundering. One of our concerns here in British Columbia has been that taking the actions that we're taking, we're going to displace this activity to other provinces. And we were hopeful that other provinces would step up and take the legislative reforms that we've made around beneficial ownership of companies, of property, and around law enforcement to actually have somebody looking at that information, doing investigations that lead to prosecutions. And so if Ontario is interested in that, I'm certainly glad to hear it, and I hope that they continue to move forward with the legislative reforms around beneficial ownership of companies and land that will support that law enforcement effort. From British Columbia's perspective, really at this stage, we're just looking for those resources to get those dedicated police officers working on this using federal jurisdiction. We've got many unlicensed money services businesses, unregistered with FINTRAC, that could be closed tomorrow if there were police out there that had the resources to be able to do that work. That's just one example of what could be done and why we will continue to press the federal government for resources for enforcement. Information sharing is critically important, but as we know with the FINTRAC reports, well, here in British Columbia, those reports were collected, but who was looking at them? and the information can be shared, but shared with whom in British Columbia? And so that was a key message that we delivered to our federal colleagues. Recognition and appreciation for today, bringing us together, recognition and appreciation for the resources they're putting on the table, the changes to the criminal code, critically important. At the end of the day, we need enforcement here in British Columbia. We've put all the legislative pieces in place to make that enforcement a success. We're ready partners. We accept we have a problem. You're not going to find a better partner, federal colleagues, in terms of that. And I'm so glad to hear that other provinces are looking at this as well.
Minister Morneau, just wondering, do you have any idea yet, like how that money is going to be apportioned out? Like, I mean, there's a talk about, BC wants a certain cut, Ontario, like, and has that money actually been apportioned yet? And decisions so that there are, money in people's budgets and new police officers on the job.
Well, let's start with the beginning. We've been working on this together for a number of years, trying to get at the understanding of who owns corporations. That's been critically important. We've been working together with the provinces. That's a real source of important progress that we've made, and I think we made more progress today. We know that the coordination and collection of information, as Minister Eby said, is critically important. It's a critically important starting point. That's why we've been putting more money into that area. We also know that we need to find a way to have crack teams of investigators in terms of the actual background behind the money laundering working forward. We put in place money in our budget to deal with that. So it is a team that's going to be coordinating, trying to get the information. I think that what you're asking is about the apportionment of the money that we've already committed, which is generally money that's trying to make sure that we have the information to actually get at this. And the new money is trying to ensure that we actually have the database information to move forward appropriately. And so I'll ask Minister Blair if he could talk about the more specifics around prosecution.
Yeah, just to be very specific.
Here, I'll go around.
Yeah, thanks. We're just shuffling around here. We've made very significant new investments in the capacity of the RCMP, of the CBSA, of our Canada Revenue Agency, and of FinTrack to improve the federal response to money laundering. We've listened very carefully to British Columbia, but to all of our provincial partners. And it's a collaborative effort right across the country. Those additional resources will go to strengthening the federal policing response to this issue. And those resources will be dedicated to where the work is. And so through greater coordination and analysis of the evidence and of the intelligence that we're gathering by working very closely with our provincial partners, we're building a new capacity to respond more effectively in both investigations and subsequently successful prosecutions. And so we didn't discuss today specifically allocations of particular resources. What we have discussed is the need to work more collaboratively together to ensure that the federal government and the provinces are working together to address legislative and regulatory vulnerabilities that exist and to work more collaboratively together to get the job done. And we're very grateful, by the way. I think it's important to acknowledge the excellent work that's done here in British Columbia, but I was equally encouraged. I wasn't surprised, but encouraged and reassured by the clear commitment from all of our provincial partners. We heard from Quebec and Ontario, from Manitoba, from Nova Scotia, and from others who are very clearly committed to working in a collaborative way, a coordinated way to do a better job of closing these vulnerabilities that currently exist in the Canadian regulatory environment, and to ensure that we work more closely together, more successfully together, to address the issue of organized crime. Organized crime is motivated entirely by profit. And by working together, we can take that profit away from them. And by doing that, we make all our communities safer. And we protect the integrity of financial institutions and financial instruments in this country. And so there was clearly a commitment at the table today to continue to work together to do better.
I know that the government also announced, this joint task force. I think they called it ACE. Has the structure of that been determined yet, and like who is going to lead that, and how it might roll out in the various provinces?
Yeah, if I may speak to this, the action coordination and enforcement team that's being established, that work has already begun. The lead will be the RCMP, but there will be other partners and federal agencies and provincial agencies that will be involved in that. It's really about looking, first of all, at the policy and logistical framework framework that's being established now. We're hoping that that will be well in place and up and running in the coming year, and that will bring greater coordination so that we can utilize the information that is available, the data that is available. You know, the finance minister also announced a significant new investment to give our federal agencies more IT tools to better access and utilize the data that currently exists, and we're working together right across provincial, territorial, and the federal government to look at where there are data information gaps, how we can close those gaps and do a better job. And one of the words we heard consistently throughout the day was the need for greater coordination between us, and that will be the primary responsibility of the ACE team.
Hi, Ministers. Jen St. Dennis from the Star Vancouver. So cryptocurrency and things like Bitcoin ATMs have been identified as a money laundering concern. There has been federal legislation changes to enable that sector to be regulated as a money service business, but it hasn't been put in place yet. Can you tell me if there's any movement on that soon?
We'll shuffle again.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
We talked about the importance today at getting at some of the issues like unlicensed ATMs. You know, I don't call it cryptocurrency, I call it crypto assets, because we don't see these as currencies at this stage. We are not only looking at this issue in Canada, but really around the world in terms of our discussions at G7 and G20 tables. Clearly, there's a need for us to pay close attention to this asset class because of the nature of what it is, which is largely an asset class that can move money around without any real disclosure. So that is something that we're all seized with, and I think we're making progress internationally in looking at how that sector can be more appropriately regulated. But I don't have anything new to announce in that regard today.
Why the delay? Like, why is it taking so long?
We see this as work that we need to do to make sure that we continue to stay on top of this area. It's not a currency, as I said, so there's no requirement for federal government to put that into a currency framework. We're trying to make sure that as part of our overall money laundering efforts that we consider crypto assets as something that's a vehicle for doing that. So that is part and parcel of this. There's no delay. It's part of an overall look at how we deal with money laundering. It's just one other asset class that allows people to move assets around. Prosecutorial efforts in that regard are consistent with other efforts to actually get at how people are moving money.
Okay, thank you.
Because of time constraints, we're going to move to one question.
Oh, so now honestly, please, I'm the only francophone journalist here, so if you don't mind. Monsieur
But you
Morneau.
speak English very well.
Oui, mais je vais quand même vous poser une question en français. Monsieur Morneau, tout d'abord, bon, on parle de 10 millions, on parle d'un effort de coordination. Concrètement, là, sur quoi vous êtes entendu ce matin avec les collègues provinciaux?
Concrètement, on a entendu que ici, à Colombie-Britannique et à Québec, on a déjà fait des efforts très importants. Donc, on va travailler ensemble pour continuer d'améliorer la situation. Mais la lutte contre le blanchissement d'argent, c'est vraiment un enjeu où c'est nécessaire de un niveau de coordination entre les provinces, les territoires et le gouvernement fédéral. Ça, c'est ce que j'ai entendu. Et bien sûr, on a entendu que c'est nécessaire de considérer les prochaines étapes. Donc, une prochaine étape très importante est d'avoir un niveau de